Hello, watchers and listeners, and welcome to another episode of the Author Interview Plunge. Today's guest is Bev Scott, a consultant and a Western author who's written books on surprise, consulting, and the West. Bev is a Montana girl who learned to love the city and California. She currently resides in San Francisco. Her interest in writing began as the co-editor of her high school newspaper. She's focused on writing nonfiction during her career as an organizational consultant, and after she got everyone organized, she started tracing her genealogy to confirm a whispered family secret. That secret became her first novel, Sarah's Secret, a Western tale of betrayal and forgiveness. Her nonfiction books include Consulting on the Inside, a practical guide for internal consultants, co-authored with B. Kim Barnes, and Consulting on the Inside, an internal consultant's guide to living and working inside organizations. One has to wonder if these two areas of expertise will come together in an industrial espionage story set in the homesteadable West. Watchers and listeners, please welcome Bev Scott. Hello, Bev. How are you?
I'm doing well. How are you, Joseph?
Today's a good day. I'm talking to you, so it's a good day. We're going to go into the questions, all righty?
Sure.
Very good. I want to start with your book signings. I know you've done them. I understand you were recently in Washington, D.C. and that general area doing readings and signings. Do you find those types of events useful?
Well, let's put it this way. I like doing them. I spent a lot of my career working with groups, and I facilitated and trained and coached. I like doing that. So doing a presentation, doing a reading comes naturally, and I enjoy it. And I made a decision that I would only do promotional things that I enjoy.
Wow, good for you. You're the first person who's actually said that. So yay, you go, girl. Okay.
Yeah.
So the presentations, the book signings, you're comfortable in front of an audience. Do you do all your own marketing?
Do I do all my own marketing? I have an assistant who works with me.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have any formal relationship with a publisher. That's
okay.
Yeah.
Okay, so does that work for you? Doing how does that work for you? I guess is what I'm really curious about.
How does that work for me? Well, it's based on the fact that I self-published, so I don't have publisher paying for things. So it means I either pay someone else to do it, or I do it myself, and that's why I made a decision to do only those things that I enjoy doing. And
okay.
This helps do some things that I don't enjoy doing.
So what types of things do you think are the best for you? Obviously, being in front of an audience, you're comfortable doing that. Do you guys have an email list? I know you have a blog.
Yes.
We're going to talk about your blog.
I do have an email list. We put out a newsletter every couple of months, and I do blog, which I enjoy. I enjoy the writing part of that.
Okay. And we'll have links, just so our audience knows, we'll have links to your blog and to your newsletter, et cetera, on this interview page. I'm sorry, I interrupted you. Go ahead.
Right. And my assistant helps with posting things on my website and on media. So
good. Your book, Sarah's Secret, a Western tale of betrayal and forgiveness, and that's a heck of a title. That's inspired by your grandparents who homesteaded throughout New Mexico, Oklahoma, Kansas, Nebraska. These were world travelers, evidently. Could you tell, without spoilers, okay, tell us something about that? You said it was based on discovering a family secret?
Yes. I think probably one way of talking about that is that my grandfather was 30 years older than my grandmother. And when he died, they were living in New Mexico. she took her family back to Nebraska. So part of when the 20 years they were married, they lived in Nebraska, Oklahoma, and New Mexico. But some of the story takes place in Kansas and in Texas, in addition to those other states.
Okay. I've read.
Homesteading.
Oh, go
They
ahead.
homesteaded. So part of the reason for being in different states, I think, was the sort of desire to move on. Making an assumption about that because I didn't talk to them about it.
Okay. Reading through your blog, I got a sense from your posts, and I could be mistaken, but I got a sense from your posts that you're a spiritual person. And your work in organizations that dealt with making better leaders, helping the human side of the workplace, encouraging people to have a sense of self-worth and professionalism. That, to me, and again, I could be mistaken, that also is something that can have spiritual overtones or tendencies. Am I correct in making that assumption?
Well, yes, I am a spiritual person. I would say that's true.
Could you tell us are you willing to share something about that? I don't mean to pry, but this is interesting to me.
Sure. I see my spirituality is based in a set of beliefs that there's more to life than this life, and that there's a larger energy, divine energy in the world, that we're all interconnected,
Mm-hmm.
and that it's important to acknowledge that interconnectivity, the wholeness that we all are a part of.
Okay, so your definition of spirituality, and I appreciate your being patient with me through this, it doesn't sound to me like what I would recognize as a standard religious thing. It sounds. Go
I
ahead.
think there's a difference between religion, which is usually based in some kind of dogma that an institution has established and people accept. And my spirituality is more personal and it's not part of an institution.
Okay, very good. Okay, going back to your work as an organizational development consultant, and I'd never heard that term, so that was a new thing for me. How does one transition from being an organizational development consultant to being a fiction author?
Retire.
Okay, so you basically said, I put my years in, I got my watch, great, now I'm going to do something I like. Is that what happened?
Well, I loved being a consultant. It wasn't that I didn't like it. It wasn't that I was tired or whatever, but I felt like I'd been doing it a long time. And I was ready to explore some other things. And I'd long wanted to do some genealogy and explore my ancestry. And even toward the end of my career, and I wasn't working full time, I found I really didn't have the time to write the book. So I did the genealogy portion when I was still doing consulting.
Oh.
I had to write a book. It was time to retire.
Okay. Did you travel a lot to do this development?
Yeah, actually, I sandwiched traveling to the locations where my grandparents had lived, doing it on vacations and like that, trips. I wanted to see, well, I started out in the National Archives in Washington. I went to Indiana, where my grandfather was born. I went to Texas to try to find out anything about him because he lived there. Mm-hmm. I went to these different places and I gathered some information, but not enough to answer all the questions that I had. So that's why I decided to fictionalize the story.
Well, that goes right into my next question. Your grandfather was born in 1840, pre-Civil War, U.S. Civil War era,
Yes.
and there were gaps in your genealogy research, as you were just saying. You had to fictionalize some things. So you had these pockets, I guess I would say, of verifiable information, and then there'd be a stretch of, well, they were here and then they were over there, what happened in between? How do you come up with the fiction parts? How do you make it all work? I know that really good fiction has truth as a kernel in it, and you're dealing with your family doing
Right.
this. So I probably should ask, did you get hated after you did this? Did all of
No.
your relatives, oh my God, Bev, why'd you do this?
Well, not yet anyway. Part of that is that my grandparents and their children, their immediate children, are no longer alive. So they're not around to criticize my book. uh, I have cousins who have read the book and who seem to like it, but of course, around when at the time the book is set either. So at this point, the family has been positive.
Excellent.
To answer your question about how do you take some factual information and fictionalize, well, what I did was I used the information that I had known through my genealogy research. But that information doesn't convey emotions. It doesn't have dialogue. And so part of the book that's factual is also fiction if you think about dialogue and emotions and motivations and things like that. On the other hand, I also had this gap of about 12 to 13 years where my grandfather disappeared. He wasn't in any records anywhere. And then he shows up again. So that's the biggest gap that I had to create. So I created what I hypothesized he might have been doing during that time. And it was in the late 1870s, 1880. And he was in Texas. And so my hypothesis is that he joined a cattle drive because that was the time of longhorn cattle driven from Texas up to Dodge City. So that was my hypothesis. So I did a lot of research about cattle drives and created that part of his life, that whole part of his life.
Those 13 years could also be where that industrial espionage in the Old West comes in.
Yeah. Maybe it could be with, Wyatt Earp in Dodge City.
Yeah.
Related to the railroad.
Yes.
And picked up the cattle. I mean, we could take it from there.
It sounds like, I was calling your work Western. It sounds more like creative nonfiction. Are you familiar with that genre?
Yes, I am. And I debated about calling it creative nonfiction, but there's a whole section of the book, a very large section of the book, which is totally made up and was more than I felt would be legitimate.
Okay. All right. I'm just making a suggestion. Okay. Now more about you. What is your favorite personal anecdote, good or bad, about yourself?
Is it okay if I go way back in my...
It's your favorite.
Life and career?
Yeah.
When I was quite young, in my middle 20s, I was encouraged to apply to be the executive director of a nonprofit organization. And so I applied, and they offered me the job at in those days was a lot of money, less than the man who'd held the job before. $5,000 less, which is probably, I don't know, 100,000 now, I don't know. So I got up, I said, thank you very much, but I'm not interested, and got up and left the interview. They sent someone out to talk to me, and he said, well, you know why they offered you less money? It's because you wear a skirt. And I said, so? I'll wear pants.
You're my hero.
So he encouraged me to negotiate, which I was young enough, I didn't have a lot of experience negotiating. So I countered and got the job and got what I wanted in terms of a reasonable salary.
Good for you. I'm proud
that's
of you.
probably my favorite anecdote about myself.
Yes, and I'm proud that I know you. You're my hero, as I said. Okay, so what's your favorite personal anecdote, good or bad, about someone else? Is it about the schmuck who didn't offer you the right salary? Happened a while ago. There was this guy, didn't offer me the right money. What's your favorite personal anecdote, good or bad, about somebody else? Don't worry about being kind.
Well, I think probably a personal anecdote would be one about my father.
Okay.
Who was very encouraging of me. And I was growing up in a time when girls were not really encouraged to have careers. And he encouraged me a lot to have a career. And one of the things he said to me was, be a lady, but use your head. And I don't know, maybe 20 years later, a colleague said to me, I don't know how you get away with being so confrontive and direct with your clients, and yet they see you as a lady. And I said, so I told this anecdote about my father. Mm-hmm. I think he gave me some good advice.
Yes, yes. Okay, so you write historical fiction, Western, creative nonfiction, whatever you want to call it, but it takes place in the past. If you could travel through time, when and where would you go?
Oh, wow. Well, since I enjoy history, there are many times in history I wouldn't want to live. That's for sure, because of the hardship. I think if I had a choice, I would maybe travel back in time and have the luxury of being royal, so we had more comfort, and be able to make decisions about a more just and humane environment, which would be counter to the way most society and royal.
Yes, and then you'd have to take your dad's advice and be a lady, but be very strong. Okay.
Yes.
Excellent. Who is your favorite fictional character?
Well, I always have a hard time answering that question. I've been asked it before. I have a hard time answering it. I've settled on the character that I read as a young girl in Little Women, and that was Jo, the character in Little Women, who is a strong and independent woman. And I served as a role model for me.
I was going to say, that sounds like you.
Yeah.
My goodness. All right. What do you want readers to remember about your book?
I would like people to remember about my book that it is that it is about the story of a woman who suffered and struggled with poverty, being a widow, um, with serious illness, and trying to raise her children alone. At the same time, she was inspiring and persistent and became a strong and self-reliant woman in her life.
I sense a theme running through your stuff here. I'm just saying. Okay.
Well, isn't that true in most people's lives?
Yes, it is.
There's a
I've
theme.
yet to figure out what mine is, but
Well,
okay.
maybe sometime I'll interview you.
There you go. That would be wonderful. I look forward to it.
Okay.
We're going to ask you a question about being the actual job of working on being an author. Some authors tell me that writing is a solitary profession, and I get the image of the author hammering on a keyboard. There's an unshielded light bulb burning over their heads. They're in a loft somewhere, and there's an ashtray full of cigarette butts, strong cup of coffee. How accurate is that to your authoring experience?
Oh, maybe about 50%.
Strong cup of coffee and the cigarette butts, which part's right?
No coffee, no cigarettes.
Okay.
I drink tea.
Good for you.
I would say that I think writing is a lonely endeavor,
Mm-hmm.
which was initially it was initially challenging to me to sit down to write not just this book but the other books that I've written. And one of the things I've learned about that is to schedule my writing time so that I had a block of time and I could get my head into it.
Mm-hmm.
But to not have that be an everyday event.
Mm-hmm.
And in the books I've written, I haven't had, it hasn't been my full career just to write.
Mm-hmm.
So I always had other things that were a part of my life. And that
Okay.
me to balance that alone time with my needs to engage with other people.
Okay, excellent. So what did you find most useful in learning to write, and what was the least useful or most destructive in learning to write? Because you've written, I guess I would call it like a trade technical, your consulting books,
Yeah,
those are professional books, I guess I would call them.
yeah,
And
they're
then
professional books.
right. So what did you find most useful in learning to write, and what was most or least useful in learning to write?
Just to write, period, not to write fiction. I want to clarify your question.
Whatever you want to answer.
Oh, okay. Well, writing my professional books was not too dissimilar from writing in my thesis
Oh.
in graduate school.
Mm-hmm.
So I, through college and graduate school, did a lot of writing. In my career, I did a lot of writing.
Mm-hmm.
All of it was nonfiction, of course, and it
Yeah.
was related to my profession. So that was never challenging, but
Okay.
always thought that I couldn't write fiction. That just seemed like something that was beyond my talents, beyond my skills. I couldn't do that. So when I was encouraged to turn my genealogy story into a book, and I explored how to go about doing that and was encouraged to write fiction, I went to some workshops to learn more about writing fiction. I mean, I've always read lots. Even so, a lot of my reading was professional reading. So I considered myself an expert on fiction. So I went to a lot of workshops, and that was very helpful.
Mm-hmm.
The most helpful thing for me when I was starting out writing this book was to be a part of a book group and to have people make suggestions and critique and um, really give me ideas about how to address some of the challenges that I ran into in the story. So
Okay.
that I would recommend to anyone who is trying to write is a
Excellent.
writers group, I guess is a better way to say it.
Right. What was the least helpful thing?
Um, well, that's a tough one. I don't know that I could identify anything that was least. Yes, I think I could. Um, the transition from writing nonfiction to fiction. Um, when you're writing nonfiction, you're describing um, what's going on or concepts and that sort of thing in language that's what I would call efficient. You don't want to be too wordy. So making the transition and learning the sort of guideline of showing, not telling in fiction, where you're showing people's emotion and you're showing what they're doing, was initially a hard transition for me. And I think having done so much nonfiction writing before, I had to learn quite a bit about not doing so much
Mm-hmm.
telling, and especially in historical fiction because I did a lot of research and I love history. I had all this history I wanted to tell, and people don't want to read that. So that was probably the harder part was to do that
Okay.
editing.
Good. What is something memorable you've heard from your readers and fans, and what was the worst comment you heard?
Okay, well, memorable was that Sarah was inspirational to them. Um, Probably, I don't know that any comment has been really terrible, but um, one reviewer um, told me I totally missed the irony um, in my story, and my response was sort of like, "That's not what I was writing."
Okay, very good. Bev, I want to thank you. This has been a marvelous time for me to learn, and I appreciate your time. I've got one more question. Are you ready for it?
I think so.
Okay. Is there anything you want to add before I ask my final question?
Well, I don't know exactly what your final question is, but one thing I would like to say, since you have such a following, I'm hoping that some of your followers are in Nebraska because a lot of my book takes place in Nebraska. And I'm going to be in Nebraska in September for a week, 10 days, um, doing some readings and talking about the book and the genealogy and so forth. And I'm hoping that they'll be available to come.
Well, I will do my utmost to get it out there, and please send me the information, and we'll
I
make
will.
sure that
I'll give
everybody in
you.
Nebraska knows about it. Okay, here we go. Last question. Are you ready?
I'm ready.
All right. What question do you wish that someone would ask about you or your book, but nobody has?
Ah, well, One of the questions that I've often wanted people to ask was how I felt about my grandfather. And no one has really asked me that question. They often make statements about him based on the book and make the assumption that I feel that that's how I feel about him. So I think that, and you want me to answer that question?
How do you feel about your grandfather?
Well, for a long time, I was really angry with him. And it was very helpful to write the book.
Mm-hmm.
I had no, that wasn't a goal. It was to work out my anger about my grandfather. But it really helped me better understand him as a person in writing the book. So I am much more tolerant and accepting of him as a result.
Good. Very cathartic then.
Yeah.
And again, that goes to your spiritual side. All right, Bev, thank you so much for this. Bev Scott, folks, the author of Sarah's Secret, A Western Tale of Betrayal and Forgiveness. Are we going to be seeing more books out of you, Bev?
Well, I don't have any current plans for another book, but lots of people are asking me, and I have some ideas, so we'll see.
Okay, so we're going to get those people in Nebraska in September to harass you to get more books written. Okay, all right. Everybody in Nebraska, remember that. Okay, thank you so much, Bev. I do appreciate this. Take care.
Thank you for this opportunity. It was fun.
My pleasure. Talk to you later. Bye-bye.
Okay. Bye.